And we are back. Today we're going to talk about why the Kentucky Derby pace is almost always faster than expected, why the pace so frequently collapses, why the race generally favors closers, and most importantly, who will benefit if this year's Derby pace collapses. If ever there was a year where it looked like the Derby wouldn't have a fast pace, it was 2013. Coming into the 2013 Kentucky Derby, there was not a single horse in the race who went to the lead in its last start. Pictured here is the Todd Pletcher trained Palace Malice, who was first-time blinkers in that year's Derby. And you see Palace Malice's form here. He was not a speed horse. He was positioned 5th in the Bluegrass, rallied to 2nd. He has a race down here, the Risen Star, where he was positioned in 9th. Palace Malice absolutely ran off in the blinkers, 45-1. It's not very often that you see Mike Smith getting run off with. And the very unexpected pace setter, Palace Malice, collapsed the pace in that year's Derby. You see, these were the horses positioned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 after the opening quarter in that year's Derby. Palace Malice faded to finish 12th, beaten 13.5 lengths. He came right back to win the Belmont Stakes in his very next start. Golden Sense, a horse that stalked, rated nicely, pounced, and won the Santa Anita Derby in his prior start. He was positioned 2nd by a head. He faded to finish 17th, beaten only 49.5 lengths. Golden Sense was no bum. He went on to win 2 Breeders' Cup Dirt Miles, and he sired a Kentucky Derby winner, Golden Sense being the sire of Mystic Dan. You see, Falling Sky was positioned 3rd at the first call. He got beat 53 lengths. Verrazano was positioned 4th. He got beat 15 3/4 lengths in this race. Verrazano come right back to win his next 2 starts, including a 10-length victory in the Haskell. Hijack, position 5th, got beat 52 3/4 lengths. How about Oxbow? He ran a heroic race. He was positioned 6th. He was the only one of these horses that didn't get beat 10 or more lengths. He got beat 9 3/4 lengths. Oxbow, of course, went on to win the Preakness in his very next start at 15-1 odds. And who was second in that Preakness? It's My Lucky Day, who was positioned 7th, faded to get beat 22 1/4 lengths. These were your 1-2 finishers in the Preakness 2 weeks later. This was your next out Belmont Stakes winner. All of the closers that dominated this race proved to be inferior to some of these horses. Look, the Kentucky Derby is a 10-furlong race. It's further than these horses have ever run. They got to carry 126 pounds. That's a lot of weight for a 3-year-old this time of year. And maybe most importantly, you've got a 20-horse field. There is a long run to the first turn, but riders frequently have to use their horse a little bit to try to get the position they want. And of course, something that people don't like to talk about, a lot of times there's rider error. You don't really expect Mike Smith to get run off with, and if you got an unexpected pace setter like Palace Malice in a race where you don't think there's much pace, you don't want to let him get away too far, do you? If there is a gold standard for rider error in this race, it might have been the year Rich Strike won. You see here, the horse in the lead is Summer is Tomorrow, and the horse that's sitting second also came out of the same race as Summer is Tomorrow, the UAE Derby. This horse was trained by the same guy that trained 6-Speed, by the way. In the 2022 UAE Derby, Summer is Tomorrow set the pace, and this horse, Crown Prince, stalked. The early fractions in the 2022 UAE Derby were 24.72 for the first quarter, 47.63 for the half. What might have got overlooked is the way they time races in Dubai. The races are timed from when the gate opens, a standing start. In America, there's a huge run up to the pole, so the horses have a running start by the time that the clock starts. Anyway, Summer is Tomorrow went 21-3 for the first quarter in this race, a record pace. I think some of these jockeys back here misjudged how fast this horse was. You know, there's a speed horse from Dubai in the race. How fast did he go last time? He went 24.73. Oh, he's not that fast. But when he's out there in hand running 21-3 for the first quarter and another foreign horse stalking him, I think some of these riders maybe thought they weren't going that fast. And as Steve Chris says, anyone who thinks jockeys have clocks in their head have rocks in their head. And that's the truth. And that was Steve Chris's quote. But trainers love that quote. It's just so true. Rider error can sometimes be part of the reason why these collapses happen as well. The 2001 Derby was another one of these classic meltdown cases. Song and a Prayer went 44-4 on the lead. A horse named Balto Star pressed him from second. Balto Star set the pace in the Arkansas Derby and the Spiral in his previous races and won them both very impressively. A horse named Keats was positioned third behind that 44-4 half. He regressed. Millennium Wind, a horse that went wire to wire in the Bluegrass, he was positioned fourth, backed up. The Bob Baffert trained Congaree was the only horse who really lived this pace. He sat in fifth and was able to go on to finish third. Express Tour was the horse positioned sixth. He beat Street Cry in this UAE Derby. This wasn't some, phony UAE Derby win. He beat a great horse in Street Cry. But Express Tour backed up in the Derby. Point Given, a Hall of Fame horse, was positioned too close to this pace. He backed up. And Talk Is Money, who was positioned eighth behind that pace, just didn't even finish the race. So Congaree was essentially the only horse who lived the pace. And the winner of that year's Kentucky Derby was Monarchos, who closed from 15 lengths back to win it. Monarchos was defeated by Congaree in his final prep, the Wood Memorial, but he obviously turned the tables on him in the Derby. Congaree 5 lengths back in third. And that's the thing about these paces, when they can get too hot and a horse is positioned too close to it. Point Given, you see here, is a horse that could come from off the pace. In the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, he was 14th and last, rallied to finish second. He did not need to be this close to the pace, and he weakened and faltered in the Derby, but they come right back in the Preakness. They had him 10 lengths off the pace, rallied to win, won the 1.5 mile Belmont by 12.25, won the Haskell, won the Travers. You will get some closers that jump up and surprise you in the Derby. Here's where Mind That Bird was positioned going into the first turn. He went on to win this race by 6 lengths at 50-1. Didn't exactly look like a winner going into the first turn. Here is a look at how the horses with the best Timeform US late pace rating going into the Kentucky Derby have fared in the race. And in 2017 is when the Racing Form started publishing the early pace and late pace figures. I worked at Timeform US as a figure maker before they got bought out by the Racing Form. Once the Daily Racing Form bought them out, I went into jockey agenting. But the brainchild of these figures is a guy named Craig Milkowski. He's a guy that had like a computer science degree, and he was in the military for 20 years, one of these computer guys for the military. But he's a very sharp handicapper and very, very good with computers and numbers. So these late pace ratings are essentially like a speed figure for final fractions. You could think of them along those lines. You could find them in the Daily Racing Form for every horse. And they started publishing them in the Racing Form in 2017. And as you see, horses with the best late pace rating have done quite well in the Derby. You got a 65-1 winner, an 80-1 winner, 2 for 9, 3 second place finishes. And sometimes these figures might surprise you a little bit. I don't think anyone would have expected Journalism to have the best late pace rating in 2025. But Journalism was running in these short fields in California, like these 5-horse fields with like 2 Bob Baffert horses that weren't hooking up. So he had to deal with slow paces, and he finished very strongly in those races. Journalism had a 116 late pace rating, 2 points higher than Sovereignty. I think Final Gambit had a 110 late pace rating. Sandman's was lower than that. He was coming out of these very fast-paced races that collapsed, basically just out finishing the maiden publisher. But basically, if you're trying to get a gauge on which horses got the best late pace, these numbers are better than using these like weird final fraction calculations. Final fractions are just raw time. It's a lot easier to come home fast at Colonial Downs than it is at, Keeneland. You see American Promise running 146-2 at Colonial in the Virginia Derby last year. And Bluegrass Stakes last year was won in 151-1, almost 5 full seconds slower than the Virginia Derby. But the Bluegrass got a bigger number, 96 versus 95. Now, granted, these are buyer numbers, but all speed figures essentially do is take the speed of the surface into account. And that's kind of the same thing with these late pace figures. They'll take the speed of the surface into account. And that's why using these late pace numbers are better than using final fractions, because, at least the speed of the surface is getting accounted for in the late pace figures. And don't take this the wrong way. I'm not making it seem like Rich Strike was easy to have because he had the best late pace figure. That's nonsense. Rich Strike had a 110 late pace rating in that race, just 1 point higher than Zandon. You see the past performances for Zandon here. Zandon had a late pace rating of 109. But if you were to compare Zandon's form to Rich Strike's form, Zandon's form looked like a Ruth Chris steak compared to Rich Strike's McDonald's cheeseburger. You would have taken the 109 second best in the race for Zandon over the 110 for Rich Strike. Zandon obviously ended up finishing third in the Derby. But here's the thing, a horse like Zandon, who was 3-1 on the morning line, obviously drifted up. He's a horse that you can't really give a one-dimensional ride to. You're on a horse that's really live in the race. You can't take a big hold of him early and drop him out the back. Whereas with Rich Strike, Sonny Leone had post position 20 in the race, took a big hold, dropped him back, saved ground. There are actually 3 different horses in this year's Kentucky Derby who have higher late pace ratings than both Zandon and Rich Strike did. Rich Strike's 110, Zandon's 109 were the 2 best going into the 2022 Derby. In this year's Derby, Renegade has 116, Golden Tempo has a 113 late pace, Silent Tactic a 112. You cannot give a one-dimensional ride to a horse like Renegade. There's a lot of pressure on a Rod Ortiz. Whereas if you're the rider of a horse like Golden Tempo, or even a horse like Silent Tactic, you can give a one-dimensional ride in this race. You could take the horse in hand early and just hope that a thermonuclear pace develops. But you gotta love the Kentucky Derby, and so many times you're just left scratching your head. How did the pace get so fast in this race? How did it melt down? So if you think a crazy pace meltdown might happen, Silent Tactic, a horse to look at, certainly Golden Tempo, a horse to look at. But that is only if a crazy fast pace develops. If they don't go stupidly fast early in this race, those 2 horses are going to have a hard time hitting the ticket. If they go crazy fast, you got all these nice stalkers. They'll be too close to it. They'll come off the bridle. They'll spit the bit. They'll wave the white flag. They'll give the rider the middle finger and low foam. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.